Welcome to Revelation Unraveled. I'm your host, William Tapley, also known as the third eagle of the apocalypse and the co-prophet of the end times. The topic of this program is chapter 5 of that great Old Testament prophet, Daniel. Chapter 5 tells the story of Belsasar's feast, where the king sees the handwriting on the wall, which spells out his doom. Now, the questions we will ask on this program are: does this predict the end of Western civilization as we know it? Or does this predict the end of the reign of the Antichrist? Who does Belsasar and his kingdom represent? Does he represent the Antichrist, or does he represent Western civilization? I believe if we study Daniel carefully, we will find out exactly who Belsasar represents. Let's look at chapter number 5. Chapter number 5 describes the defeat of the Babylonians under Belsasar by the Medes and the Persians. In verse number 1, Daniel writes, "Belsasar the king made a great feast and invited 1,000 of his nobles." Some Bible translations, instead of nobles, say lords or princes. The important thing is that this word, nobles, is repeated 6 times in this chapter. In verse number 2, Daniel writes, "And being drunk, he," that is Belsasar, "commanded that they bring the vessels of gold and silver, which Nebuchadnezzar his father had brought away out of the temple that was in Jerusalem." Belsasar has been drinking too much, and now we will see that he will profane the sacred vessels that belonged to the temple in Jerusalem. In verse number 4, Daniel writes, "They drank wine and praised their gods of gold, silver, brass, iron, wood, and stone." Notice that there are 6 types of these pagan idols, and Daniel repeats this phrase twice. Thus, along with the 6 nobles, we have 6 items mentioned 3 times, and of course that is 666, the number of the Antichrist. Could this be a clue that Belsasar is a prefigure of the Antichrist? Now let's read verse number 5. "In that same hour there appeared the fingers of a man's hand, as it were, writing on the wall of the king's palace, and the king could see the joints of the hand." This is the supernatural judgment upon Belsasar. Is it also a supernatural judgment on the Antichrist? Belsasar the king is very upset when he sees the writing on the wall. As Daniel writes in verse number 6, "Then was the king's countenance changed, and his thoughts troubled him, and he cried aloud to bring in the wise men." Now these wise men cannot analyze the writing on the wall. But the queen, who was probably Belsasar's mother, comes in to the banquet and reminds the king about Daniel, the great Jewish prophet, who was able to interpret King Nebuchadnezzar's dreams, as we found out in other chapters of Daniel. Daniel indeed can interpret the writing on the wall, but his words must be rather sobering to Belsasar, because here is what he says in verse number 23. "You," that is Belsasar, "have lifted yourself up against the Lord of heaven." This makes it almost conclusive that Belsasar does indeed represent the Antichrist. St. John in the book of Revelation describes almost the exact same phraseology when describing the Antichrist coming up against the prince, who is Jesus Christ. And Daniel continues, "And the vessels of his house," that is God's house, "have been brought before you, and you have praised the gods of silver, gold, wood, and stone." Again, a prefiguring of the Antichrist, who will worship false idols. Now the words that Balthasar sees on the palace wall, and which Daniel interprets, are mene, tekel, and parsin. It is very important for us also to understand what these words mean, because these words have an end times meaning. Notice that Balthasar is filled with fear at seeing these words, even before Daniel interprets them. Here is how Daniel interprets the words written on the wall. Mene means God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. Tekel means you are weighed in the balance and found wanting. Phares means your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. That prophecy came true that very evening, as Balthasar was killed and the Medes and the Persians took over the Babylonian kingdom. But what do these words mean for those of us living in these end times? What is the significance of mene, tekel, and parsin? We know there will be three groups who survive the Antichrist: the raptured Protestants, the protected Catholics, and the holy martyrs. I am going to suggest to you on this program that mene, tekel, and phares represents those three groups who will survive the reign of the Antichrist. Phares means your kingdom is divided. This refers to the holy martyrs, who, when they of course die for our Lord, their souls are separated from their bodies. In other words, they are divided. Mene means God has numbered your kingdom. In the book of Revelation, we find that the Protestants who are raptured and go to the Lord's Supper are also numbered. St. John says there will be 144,000 raptured Protestants. Now let's look at the last group. Tekel means you are weighed in the balance and found wanting. If we remember in the book of Revelation, the third horseman of the apocalypse, the black horse, carries a scale in his hand, and he represents the Great Tribulation period, and he represents famine. That's why he carries a balance in his hand. That's what this also refers to. This balance that King Balthasar is weighed in, the end time significance is that it refers to the Catholics who are forced to flee into the desert, away from the apostatized Catholic Church and away from the Antichrist. Weighed in the balance refers to these remnant Catholics. Thus we see how the story of Balthasar's profane feast prefigures the reign of the Antichrist, and the names that he sees written on the wall, mene, phares, and tekel, refer to the three groups who will survive his reign: the raptured Protestants, the protected Catholics, and the holy martyrs. It's no wonder he fears those words when he sees them written on the wall, because they prefigure the fear of the Antichrist when he sees that his end is coming also. Now, if you would like more information concerning the great prophet Daniel, or any other prophecies concerning the end times, simply write to the address you see on your screen.